Welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to see you all. It feels like a blink of an eye since we were here in 2019, and yet I feel like I've lived about 40 lives. Yeah, we all know what we're talking about. I was talking to a small business earlier who also became a CEO in 2019, like me, and she said, I've lived through she's in the roofing business, 3 hurricanes and a global pandemic. I'm like, okay, you win. Because the hurricane thing, it helps Nextdoor a lot because it helps communities find each other to save each other, but you're in the roofing business. That's a whole new level when it comes to a hurricane. So we're thrilled to be back here, and I'm particularly thrilled to have Lee Mayer on stage with us. When we came in 2019, she was our dream guest, and she was at her sister's wedding.
It was my little sister's wedding, yeah.
So we told you we would come stalk you into submission, and that's what we did. We came back. Took us 4 years, but we're here.
I love it.
If you don't know Lee, you should. So her business is Havenly, which she founded with her sister in 2014 with the mission of creating a delightful experience around home shopping and design. I regularly am on her site just for great ideas. It's amazing what she can make a home look like. The company has since raised over $57 million. That's a million people. Most recently completing a Series C in 2019, or have you had more?
We haven't announced.
Okay.
We haven't announced more fundraisers. We're closer to the $100 million mark now these days.
Yeah.
Just put it that way.
You heard it here first.
Don't tweet it.
And she has an amazing background. She started more in corporate life, so she's worked at Bain & Company. She's held corporate strategy and development roles at Canon. Was VP and GM of Auto at Bankrate. But I love that she got into founding her own business and clearly has been wildly successful. So thank you for coming along and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
So take us back. Let's start a little at the beginning.
Yeah.
So you went from bootstrapping to seeking funding from investors. I think you said something like 140 no's before you got your first yes.
Yeah.
I actually think that's a pretty good hit rate, by the way. So tell us a little bit about that process, what it felt like, and how did you break through?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I have to take you back for just a quick second to understand psychologically what that meant to me. So I'm like a gold star kid. Like, you just tell me I'm doing a good job and I'll keep doing it forever. Like, my parents are Indian immigrants. If any of you have Indian immigrant parents, you might understand this. Where it's like, you just do the things. Like, you get, like, my mom was like she was actually just at my house, this morning. She just left. She's the classic, like, I got a 97 on a math test, and she was like, what happened to the other 3 points? So that's like, if you have parents like that, that's what I grew up with. And so I kind of chased, I guess, approval in a really weird way. For me, that meant I got the grades, and then I went to the schools, and then I worked at the jobs that would get me some sort of prestige, that I was relatively risk averse. And honestly, what that meant was if I worked hard enough, I would never deal with rejection. Like, quite literally, it was like I just like made my life in this way where no one would have to tell me that I sucked or said no to me in a weird way. Like, it was like, okay, you just kind of like keep climbing these rungs of things. And so, I started Havenly by accident. I didn't almost intend to start Havenly. It was sort of like this thing that I was doing because in Denver at the time, I didn't find enough of those jobs that was like giving me those pats in the back. So, I was doing this on the side while I looked for something else. I started Havenly. And then all of a sudden, that's all I was doing. And then, we were bootstrapped, which is like a fancy way of saying customers were paying, like I was making more money than what I was spending, which is, pretty cool. And then what I realized was like everyone was doing this venture funding thing. So maybe I should do this venture funding thing because remember, I'm the kid that does the things. Like if you're doing the thing and that's the way to go, I do the thing. And so I started to try and fundraise, and that was in Denver. We just started. Denver, Colorado at the time, in particular seed investing at the time, was very local. So people in San Francisco would look at me and say, well, you're a Denver company. Like, why would I ever? Which is weird. And then here in Denver, the seed market hadn't really expanded in a material way, and certainly the people that were getting funded at the time in Denver didn't look anything like me, and they certainly weren't funding businesses like mine. So as a result, and by the way, it was on my own, it was me too, right? Like I didn't know how to raise funding. I hadn't practiced my pitch. I hadn't thought about it. It was just like, oh, everyone else is doing it, so I'm going to do it. So I hadn't really refined the thought process and the process in general of fundraising. And so as a result, I got a whole lot of no's. And I always say this, you might have, if you've ever seen me speak before, I say this all the time because it's hard to understand what that means. But think about it in any other context of your life. You ask 140 guys or gals to prom and they all say no. You apply to 140 colleges. They all say no. You apply to 140 jobs, and they all say no. Not only jobs, you go to the interviews, and they all say no. You're in person with these people. They're looking at you. They're talking to you, and they're still saying no. It's soul crushing for anyone. It's particularly soul crushing for someone like me, who's literally lived a life avoiding rejection. So that happened. I think what got me through is I'm incredibly stubborn. It's just my nature in some ways, and it kind of got me through to the point where someone said yes. And the funniest part about venture fundraising is it's really like a pack of lemmings. Someone that's deemed important enough or exciting enough says yes to you, and then all of a sudden everyone says yes to you. It's the weirdest thing. I've gone through a number of funding rounds now. That one was the weirdest one, where it was for months everyone was yeah, no. And then all of a sudden somebody said yes, and within a month we're oversubscribed, and people are figuring out my cell phone and calling me to try and see if they could put in whatever. And it was a very bizarre moment where I realized it actually, don't get me wrong, it had a lot to do with me. I clearly didn't do very well, going, in the beginning, but there are some components and some dynamics that didn't have a lot to do with me. And that was an interesting exercise in sort of learning how to move through the process.
Yeah, and there's so much in there I hear over and over again. I've also raised a lot of venture funding in my life.
Yes.
And so, first of all, perfection. I think it's a very female type of characteristic. I was actually talking to a head of school about this exactly last night. I have an 18-year-old daughter. It's the thing that I think holds us back, and particularly because we tend to define success or perfection as the way we are positive about life. So we really need to change that dynamic, because all that happens is there's always another mountain to climb. Second thing I hear in there is when you go into fundraising, right? People fund a person, not really a business. They never tell you that, but that means you need to know your numbers, but you also need to be a great storyteller. And I know Leah is a great storyteller. But the no's, remember, it's a no, not right now. Because I bet a lot of those people came back. And to your point about, I'm not going to use the lemming word, because no one tweet that out coming from me, please. But it's totally true. Once you crack that first person that's willing to be your lead, a lot comes with you. And that's true not just in VC. That's in any sort of funding. It's just finding that first person. You'll find very quickly a lot of people then will kind of race towards you. Okay, so there are a lot of things you learned along the way, and VC funding may not be for everyone in this audience, but funding is funding. So what are some of the kind of things you really found along the way? Some of the things I know you've said are, don't do anything you aren't comfortable with, so maybe go down that path.
Yeah, that's actually, one of the things that I think a lot, and I've been fortunate, I think, over the last couple of years to work with a lot of female or non-binary founders. And I've realized one of the things that's actually interesting is because it's harder for us, typically, to come by funding, whether it's venture or otherwise, when we get it, we sometimes ignore the red flags that are there. And so one of the things that I always counsel people that I talk to, and what I'd say to you, is just because it's a little bit harder, make sure you're still thinking about what makes sense for you. So I'll relay a personal experience. This is public, so you can Google it. But, I ended up, for a variety of reasons, our Series A round, which is, I don't know, one of those things where they, alphabetize every round. So, it means nothing. It's just seed A, B, C, not very complicated. Anyway, our Series A round was so oversubscribed that we ended up in a competitive place. I took one term sheet, which means I accepted a round. And then there was this other fund, which was run by this one individual who was sort of like a golden person in the valley, and it was very sexy that he was thinking about investing in us. And, he was super aggressive, and I'm like, oh yeah, I could take a few more millions of dollars. If you're gonna throw it at me, cool. That sounds good. And so I think at the time I didn't, honestly I didn't do my research. And for a variety of reasons ended up taking the cash, the equity, and then this person came onto my board. And the thing that they never tell you about taking on an investor, and in particular putting them on your board, is it's nearly impossible to move away from that person. When that person...
Boards are for life, not just for Christmas.
They're literally, it's they're in your world. They can ask you anything too, by the way. They're they own you. And I'm lucky now to have a fantastic board, for anyone who's listening. But to be perfectly honest, there was this person that was on my board who just didn't feel right. The board meetings started to go awry. Things were a little weird. And then this person ended up being a serial sexual harasser. And ultimately his fund sort of blew up and, was exposed as such, and had really done some, it turns out, not great things to a lot of, frankly, women in the space. And I had this moment when this came out, and this was right as Me Too was happening in 2017, where I'm cool, I call my lawyer, I'm this is, okay, I haven't experienced this. I never, we had not weird board meetings, but I never experienced that specifically, but I really don't want this person on my board. I run a company full of women. We're 70% women. My executive team is 75% women. This is not okay. My consumers are women. We cannot have this kind of behavior on my board. And my lawyer was you can't do that. You can't do that. There's a real process to this. And it took me a ton of time and a ton of energy. I don't need to get into it, but the point is, what I would recommend as you think about you is there are things that you still shouldn't give up. If you have principles around who you have around your team, you should have them around your investors or people that give you loans or people that partner with you. Because the reality is, you'll pay for it every day some other way, if not. And so that's kind of sort of my experience around that.
I'm sorry you had to go through that, actually.
Oh, no, it was good learning. That's what I always say about all these things. I have great stories. Find me at the bar later. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, there's definitely, even as someone who's joined boards, the best advice I got is joining a board is don't join a board where you wouldn't go work for the company.
Yeah.
I think you should think about it the other way around. Don't hire someone onto your board if you wouldn't hire them into your company, because that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that point about your research, in the same way when you hire someone to work for you, I always wish you could make the interview process 20% and 80% be reference checking. Unfortunately, you actually have to create a good experience for the candidate, otherwise they won't come work for you. But really taking the time to go reference check, it's worth it. Often if you're shopping hungry, which is what I call it when I'm desperate to make a hire, you go to the store, I'm I'll have sushi and steak and tacos. And you're anything. Do you have a pulse? Come join me. You have to stop yourself. In fact, I think as a leader, one of the most important things you do is you stop the people who work for you from making decisions that are made out of emotion and out of fear. And I think that's true in a fundraising situation. Often it's fearful because you have to get your money.
Yeah.
It's the lifeblood of your company. But if money is like the blood, people are your oxygen, so you need both. And I think that's a wonderful learning to bring up.
It is.
Let's stay in investor land. So you work in an industry that's more traditionally oriented towards women. Someone earlier actually said, we're all going to stop saying male-dominated, because it turns out we dominate people, right? Instead, we're going to say, was it male majority or something? Male populated, thank you.
Oh, I like that.
But female dominated, or women and non-binary dominated, actually. Anyways, I love that. But, so you work in a more female populated arena.
Female populated, yeah.
So when you get in front of an investor that may not have experienced your product, how do you deal with that?
It's a great question. And you and I were talking about this yesterday, where like, it's crazy. So you have like professional investors. These are people that get paid tons and tons of money to evaluate businesses for their value. And you'll get into a room and they'll be like, oh yeah, my wife loves that. And you're like, okay.
Should she be here?
Like, is she also an investor? Right? Like it doesn't make any sense. Like, would you go to a health tech or fintech company and be like, or like an oil and gas company and be like, my gas station attendant, like that? It makes no sense. Like in every other realm, but the realm of businesses that sell to women, investors have a thesis. And the thesis isn't dependent upon the wife, who's not an investor. By the way, some men have wives that are investors, which is fantastic, and then we have a different conversation. But like, this is like the weirdest thing. And like, it's like for some reason when you sell to women, there's like no way of these incredibly intelligent, well-compensated people to understand the ethos or the thought process behind the business. And it's like super weird. Like for someone like you, Nextdoor, which is, I mean, an incredible company and is, by the way, loved across the world and across the country for building communities, to have like people be like, oh yeah, my wife is on it. It's so weird. But it's actually like the weirdest thing like I've faced. Maybe not the weirdest, one of the weirder things I've faced. And it like doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. And honestly, it's meant in good intention. But when you hear it as a woman, I think sometimes you're like, yeah, I don't know how to respond to that. But here's what I'm building. And here's why it's a big business. And here's when it makes sense. And I think the fact that your wife likes it is just one proof point in the fact that it's a big business and it's going to be successful. But it really does. It takes a minute, and I think for me it's still a little strange when people say it.
But what I love is what you just did, which tell every woman you have to know your numbers and know your pitch. Like, and particularly your 60-second pitch. And there's some great training you can do on it. But always go back to like, it's a big TAM, total addressable market. Here's my growth trajectory that proves everyone loves it.
Yeah.
And here's how I'm going to keep growing both the market, but also my penetration into the market. But like, go back to your numbers, get away from the world of the anecdote, because everyone lives their dream of your product, like a product like Nextdoor. Everyone's got a story. I appreciate it. I love hearing it. But I got a lot of data, and I can totally show you what's happening at a much more macro level that tells you why the business is a great business to invest in. And that's what I hear here is, don't get phased. Just cut right through it.
Yeah, and like, you know, this the hardest part about some of this is like I think what I do in practice is like, I think what we all do, which is like, all right, yeah, this might not be happening if I weren't a woman or a person of color or non-binary or whatever it is that makes you a little less represented in this world. But like, I think one of the things that I always have to say to people is like, the hardest thing that I'm going to tell you to do is if you really want, and don't get me wrong, there are going to be moments where you should stick up, you should say something. But there are also moments where you should be like, okay, this was unintentional, it was meant well, let me get back to what works.
The business, yeah.
Let me get back to the business, because this is a real business. It really does work. So let me take the thing that you said that was kind of like annoying and drive it back to, hey, gosh, there are like 100,000, 100 million other people like your wife. And that's why my business works, and here's how it works economically, or here's how it works theoretically, and here's why it fits into our thesis.
Okay, I'm going to end a little bit off the raising capital. We're in a pretty dynamic environment right now. Jen mentioned, the demise of SVB, unfortunately. What right now are you doing differently to run your business, if anything? I'm assuming something. And then one piece of advice for the audience, and then we will have to move to our next part.
Okay, so what am I doing differently? I think the biggest thing that's changed for so many of us is we started to spend more. Remember how I said I used to make more money than I spent? Well, we used to spend more money than we made. Like, that was like a lot of what was going on in people's worlds, in particular in 2021 and early 2022. And, the simplest answer is we've changed that, and we're trying to change that. And it's tough, you really have, when you get into this habit of really spending and investing, it's fun. You get the, offsites in LA. You get, paid marketing. You take, very fancy flights on United. It's so fun. But the reality is, cash is cash, and I need to spend less than I make. And those are the tough decisions. I think for those of you that are facing funding challenges right now, the one thing I will say that's rosy is in 2021, 100% of your competitors were raising $100 million rounds at billion-dollar valuations. The noise was so loud. You always felt like if you were trying to run a prudent business, you always felt a little insecure because you're like, holy crap, could I just spend, however much it is and then raise these valuations? That noise is gone. It's actually a nice time to run your business and to really think about prudent ways to raise capital. And so I think that that's actually the exciting part. We're a little locked in, so we have to do a lot of rejiggering, and it's hard. You're laying off team members, you're thinking more prudently about cash, you're saying no to a lot of requests. I'm a people pleaser. It sucks to say no. But it is what it is. I gotta get this to survive, and that's it. In terms of one piece of advice, I don't know. I think it's just be bold. You're gonna be fine. First of all, you're gonna be fine. Speaking from a Gold Star kid, you're gonna be fine whatever you decide to do. But be bold. Be intellectually curious and honest about what you're doing, and just look, is it harder for so many of us to start these things? Of course it is. But that doesn't mean it should stop you from doing it. Go do it. It's totally possible. And I think it's going to be the ride of your life.
That is a brilliant ending. I'm not going to say anything more.